I also have metrics in terms of what's causing the obesity epidemic. People are over-consuming calories in proportion to their activity level. When we look at the average amount of exercise for Americans, it's and the average caloric consumption is and people want to blame carbs? If you are fasting, you're not putting yourself in an advantageous position to do that for two reasons. One, episode 65 of the Revenge Body Podcast. I'm your host, ESV. Today I'm going to be talking about some cool shit. Hit you with some Slay information. I don't talk enough about Slay and the awesome shit we're doing at Slay. I want to give context for hormones, give you a lot of value in case you can't access Slay yet. I'm going to talk about fasting. Not from a critical place, but just hey, if fasting's working for you, great. If it's not, here's might be why. I'm going to talk about that workout video I put out where it's like strength training versus not and clear up the confusion around that and maybe like give you some extra insight on strength training. And so it's not so do this or do that. There's room in the middle. Bulkiness and strength training. That's something I know I got to hit on because it keeps coming up. I don't want to get bulky. We're going to hit on that. And then my number one trait that I would look for in a partner. I don't know why I keep getting asked that, but I'll go ahead and answer it best I can. Let's jump in. Let's talk about Slay. So a big reason why I want to talk about this is because there's a lot of confusion, I think, around lab work. And we do lab work. We find a lot of value in it. It's something that I believe is crucial for laying a groundwork and getting a baseline for where you feel like trash, right? It's like lab work is pretty much a way to determine, hey, here's where you don't feel good. We're going to optimize from here, monitor you throughout, and then when your symptoms dissipate, we'll also get lab work to see what levels those were. Because I'm here to tell you, here's my spiel on it. Imagine instead of being told you're normal based on lab work, right? Imagine how you would feel if instead of being told that since your lab work is normal, there's nothing wrong with you. Imagine just being asked how you feel instead of, well, let's get lab work. And then based on whether or not those reference ranges are normal, I'm going to either completely invalidate you or maybe prescribe something if you're out of the reference range. But what happens to all of you who are in the normal range and you're still symptomatic, which is the majority of women? The thing about perimenopause, menopause, PCOS, hypothyroidism, insulin resistance, or just your general quality of life as a woman is being within the normal ranges on lab work doesn't mean anything if you're still symptomatic. What's a free T3 level of 2.5 matter if you still struggle with your energy, if you still struggle with your ability to lose visceral fat, if you have brain fog, sleep issues, if your overall well-being is suffering? What's it matter if your free T3 is within the normal range? Who cares what the reference range says if you don't feel how it says that you should? So instead of looking at a set of numbers and saying, since you fall within this very broad range, you should feel normal, here's an antidepressant. At Slay, we found the best approach is to get a baseline of lab work so we know the levels where you are symptomatic and then optimize over time based on how you feel. Imagine that. Every person's different in how you respond to hormone therapy. Things like receptor site resistance determine how you feel at certain levels of thyroid hormone, which is why follow-up labs are important because then we can see not only how you respond at a certain dosage, but also where we can adjust the therapy to better meet your needs and help you feel amazing. So basically, it's like this. We're going to get, and again, I think I firmly am convicted in this. If a company doesn't do lab work, then it's extremely, it doesn't make sense to me, right? Yes, we treat symptoms, but not so far as to not get lab work. What if you missed something? The fact that people are prescribing estradiol and such without running labs, it just blows my mind. Okay, it blows my mind. People are doing that, but I digress. What it comes down to is we want to know how you're feeling, what symptoms you're having. We're going to listen. And by we, I'll just disclaimer. By we, I mean my medical team, my amazing ARNP, and my team of physicians that will look at your chart, ask you what you're feeling like, what your symptoms are, and then our protocol will be based upon that. And then our continuing protocol will be based on how you feel over time. Not everyone responds to hormones the same. Some people gain weight when they start progesterone. Very normal. Water retention's a thing, and it levels out over time. Some people need a higher dose of thyroid because of receptor site resistance. You don't respond the same as other people at the same dosage. So we don't use lab work as the end all be all. We use it as a point to understand, hey, here's where you don't feel good. Let's optimize and titrate if necessary to get you feeling good. This is a new school of thought. It conflicts with traditional medicine, and you're never going to find these answers in traditional medicine unless they've gone out of their way to get additional education in hormones, which is what everyone at Slay has done. So I'm just really excited about that because we're already getting feedback from the clients that we have. We are getting tremendous feedback in terms of how people are feeling, the quality of life, the service. People are loving. We've had some hiccups with the portal and stuff, which is to be expected with technology, but we've fixed those. Everything's going really freaking well, and I'm so proud of my team, and I'm so proud of this idea coming to fruition, and it's just really cool. Additional announcement, we have partnered with a new physician who is licensed in more states, and two of those that we can jump in immediately are Texas and Ohio. So it is 4/22 today, April 22nd. I am willing to bet that by the end of today, we will be in Texas and Ohio. So if you're in those two states, Texas and Ohio, in addition to the 7 that we currently serve, which are Florida, Tennessee, Georgia, South Carolina, Mississippi, Missouri, Kentucky, if you're in Texas and Ohio, get ready. We're about to fucking unleash, baby. Texas is a big state. But yeah, excited about that. So we should be in Texas by the end of today. I'll announce it on social media anyway, because I'm really excited about it. But and we're looking at even more partnerships soon. I think the next states that we will probably be in, don't hold me to this, but I'm fingers crossed for New York and New Jersey next. And then really hoping for California. We're still trying. It's complicated. I don't know. It's like 50-50. Some days I think we can do it. Some days we get new information and it looks like we can't. Currently trying to collaborate with a physician who's licensed in California so we can get in California, but it is very, very, very hard to get in California. They have some wild telemed laws, and so we're always learning, trying to see if we can get in there. But aside from that, super excited about Slay. And just so you all know, I mean, obviously you still have to check the lifestyle boxes if you want to see change with your body, but getting your hormones optimized puts you in a great position to feel great and have the energy to do the things that you need to do on the lifestyle side, but also puts you in a great position going into perimenopause and menopause and so on, because you will not deal with what happens when Mother Nature decides to rip out the hormones that gave you vitality for 40 plus years, So just really excited about that. We're already seeing people see tremendous benefits. So Slay's awesome. Let's talk about fasting. So here's, and I talked about this on my last podcast episode. I'm done fighting with people, quote unquote. I don't want to always be at odds or in this adversarial dynamic where I make the thing that you're doing sound like you're stupid for doing it. That's never my intent. And if I've ever come across that way, I apologize. I want to own that because, I'm always learning and developing, and I haven't always put out content that came across the way I intended it to, probably more aggressive and probably more shaming, really. Like I look back on content and I was like, fuck, who was I mad at? I was so mad. And I want you to know it comes from a place of being really convicted in what the way that we do things. But the more I mature and the more I learn as a person and just as a man, as a business owner, I don't have to burn down other tents to build mine. And although I do fundamentally disagree with certain approaches based on the likelihood of you doing them long term, And I do have my philosophy of, if you can't do it for the rest of your life, why ever do it? If it's working for you and you enjoy it, who am I to tell you not to do it? I can give you more information, and I can tell you that, we don't integrate it in the way we do things, but that doesn't mean that, I'm going to tell you you're dumb for doing it, or that it's wrong. I do disagree with certain approaches on a fundamental level because of there are certain objective metrics we can look at, and one of those is 95% of people regain their weight back from dieting, and we have to ask why that is. And I have my theories as to why it is, but I also have metrics in terms of what's causing the obesity epidemic. When we look at science and evidence saying that insulin, glycemic index, glycemic load, these things don't contribute to body fat gain or loss. And then we also look at the fact that insulin is not a predictor of weight loss or gain. And then we also look at the fact that carbohydrate consumption has decreased while the obesity epidemic continues to increase. And we start to look at things like total caloric consumption and the role that fat plays in caloric consumption. And you're more likely to gain weight from over-consuming fat, since the foods that people are over-consuming are higher in fat than they are carbohydrates, such as burgers, pizza, etc. Not to demonize those foods, but if we just look at it from an overall perspective, it is, pretty clear that the majority of people are struggling with chronic obesity or chronic struggles with weight loss because of an inability to cultivate awareness of total caloric consumption and protein consumption. It has nothing to do with any specific food, because the same people that follow the carb insulin model that's been debunked over and over will also be the same people to blame seed oils, where seed oils don't have carbohydrates in them. It's wild, the tribalism in the nutrition industry of people who jump to blame carbohydrates for the obesity epidemic, but then also in the same breath blame seed oils that don't contain carbohydrates. So just when you just break it down and have some critical thinking, it's like, well, people are just over consuming calories in relation to their, in proportion. People are over consuming calories in proportion to their activity level. When we look at the average amount of exercise for Americans, it's 20 minutes per week. And the average caloric consumption is 3,000 calories. And people want to blame carbs that have less calories per gram than fats. I'm not saying it's fats either. It's total calories consumed in proportion to total energy expended. And so the nuance and the middle ground for coaches is, how do we get people to not only be aware of this, but then implement the lifestyle choices necessary to move the lever? And that happens between the ears. That happens in your heart and in your mind. That doesn't happen with a blueprint or a meal plan. Those things only last while you do them. So what happens after? So that's where my conviction is. It comes from a place of knowing all of these things, being aware of these things. And for me, my point of contention is I heard of people just headed off the cliff. I see a herd of people headed off the cliff with these approaches, and I'm jumping in to save them. And they take me jumping in to save them as an assault on their character for doing that thing. But if I'm making you feel dumb for doing that thing, then I need to change my approach. And so when I talk about fasting right now, it's coming from a place of, hey, we all know fasting works. It helps people reduce caloric intake, which is to my original point, which is people are just eating too damn much in proportion to their energy expenditure. And people generally don't want to track calories. It's made to seem like it's overly stressful and time consuming. And so fasting looks like the easy way out. It looks like the easy button. It's like, oh, I can just cut my eating window in half. That'll reduce my eating. It will. It sure will. And if it works for you and you get to a place where you can fast and feel great, and then great. I want you to know that that's a win for me. I also want you to know to not take what anyone says on social media as gospel, and that includes me. Take what lands and discard what doesn't. If I tell you 10 things and only one of them works for you, but that thing that works for you helps you lose weight and get more sustainability in your life, that's a win for me. It's not a loss because you didn't implement the other 9 things. It's a win because you implemented the 1 out of 10 that actually helped. That is my authentic position in this industry. So that being said, if fasting's working for you, great. If it's not, here's some reasons if fasting is not working for you, here are some reasons why it might not be working. Number 1, We all know that protein is a filling macronutrient. It satiates you. It makes you full. And therefore, in the pursuit of wanting to maintain muscle tissue in a caloric deficit, so let's just say you're pursuing weight loss, which means you have to be in a caloric deficit, but you also want to maintain muscle, because if you lose muscle, you burn less calories at rest. Muscle helps you burn more calories at rest. It's part of your basal metabolic rate. We also know that thyroid hormone is a big part of your basal metabolic rate. And both those things are impacted by a prolonged, harsh caloric deficit. If your caloric deficit is too steep, you risk losing muscle tissue, and you risk less conversion of thyroid hormone via less glucose consumption and also less caloric consumption. We see that free T3 levels decrease with time with harsh caloric constriction. And so even more reason to eat as much as you can while still losing weight, not eat as little as you can to speed up weight loss. So that being the case, we want to have protein consumption that helps us maintain muscle tissue. And since protein is a very filling macronutrient, if you cut your eating window in half, let's just say you have an 8-hour eating window, it's more difficult to consume enough protein in that window because of how filling protein is. I mean, let's be honest, you eat 30, 40 grams of protein, you're full. And if your protein goal is 100 grams, let's just say, I'm just throwing numbers out there, that means you have 8 hours to eat 100 grams of protein. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's just harder to do. And when we're trying to cultivate a system, a value system that persists long after you've actually lost the initial weight, it doesn't really make sense to me for the majority to try and cram 100 grams of protein in an 8-hour eating window. And again, it'll work short term, you'll lose weight, but that's just part of the equation. What happens after you lose the initial weight and you want to gain muscle tissue? Okay, here's my second concern with fasting. Aside from the muscle loss that you risk with cutting your eating window in half, when it's time for you to gain muscle tissue, because again, weight loss is just part of the equation. When it comes time to develop your muscle tissue, you're going to have to eat more calories. You're going to have to consume more calories in proportion to your energy expenditure in order for your body to have excess material to put towards muscle tissue repair, development, and growth, right? And so if you are fasting, you're not putting yourself in an advantageous position to do that for two reasons. One, again, you have a limited eating window to eat enough calories to have a surplus of material with which to develop your muscle tissue. Two, if you used fasting as a way to skirt around calorie tracking to avoid becoming aware of your caloric consumption, how do you know how many calories to add back in when it's time to develop your muscle tissue? I'm not saying it's impossible. It just makes it really hard. If you haven't yet cultivated the tools like calorie tracking, like macro tracking, protein tracking, step tracking, if you haven't cultivated these tools by the time it's time for you to develop your muscle tissue, it's really hard to cultivate them overnight. And fasting as a means of avoiding calorie tracking doesn't pan out well in the big scheme of things for most people. And I say that from working with lots and lots of people and them having a background in fasting and seeing how it didn't pan out for them. So again, if it's working for you, great. If it's not working for you, this is probably why. This is the way we do things. We do things in 4 phases, and 2 of those are body fat reduction. One of those, so you got phase 1, which is body fat reduction, phase 2, which is muscle tissue development, phase 3, body fat reduction, but with the newfound muscle from phase 2, so you have a higher basal metabolic rate going into it, and then phase 4 is maintenance for life. And it's really hard to accomplish those phases if you're trying things that increase the likelihood of you not hitting a protein goal or having enough energy to put in your training sessions. It's really hard to have, you can't run a automobile without gas unless you got an electric vehicle, but even those, you need to charge them, right? So if we're thinking about what gives you the most productive and effective and intense training session so that you can provide the stimulus you need to your body in order to make the changes, then fasting isn't really in your best interest. Because if you look at the structure of your day, if you're fasting, your training session has to be right in the middle of your eating window. So you're cutting an additional window out of your eating window, right? And I say it has to be in the middle of your eating window because you can fuel before and fuel after, right? Ideally. If you put your training window at the end of your fasting window, you're going to be starving. If you put your training window at the end of your eating window, then you don't get to refuel after. So the only logical place to train during an eating window of your fasting is right in the middle of the eating window, which takes away an hour from your eating window. So that's why I have a big problem with fasting, because of the decreased likelihood of you, number one, having enough energy to put towards your training session, and number two, being able to refuel from it and being able to get enough calories to maintain muscle. Like it's like a double-edged sword. You don't have the energy to have an intense training session, and you also don't have the enough window to refuel and recover so that you're actually benefiting from the training session. That's my take on it. And that's what I would offer someone who isn't seeing results with fasting. So I hope that makes sense for you all. Okay, let's talk about that workout video where it was a reaction video, and the girl was saying, this is not strength training. This is not strength training. And I got a whole lot of inflamed peeps in the comments defending Orange Theory with their lives. First of all, I'm not taking Orange Theory away from you. I'm not taking Pilates away from you. I'm not taking bar away from you. My criticisms of those mechanisms, of those modalities, is solely in the pursuit of helping you arrange your day and your routine in the most effective manner possible for you getting to the goal that you have. I'm not saying don't do Pilates. I'm also not saying don't do Orange Theory. I'm saying if you do those things, great. If you enjoy them, keep doing it. If they get you moving and you love the camaraderie, great. I'm also saying that if you want to get stronger long-term and be able to quantify and scale your progress, you need to also do some form of strength training, traditional strength training, squats, deadlifts, bench press, rows. And before you all say, well, we do those things in a group class, it's really, really difficult to get the individual attention you need to actually scale your strength in those movements when the instructor has to pay attention to a group of people. It's hard to get the one-on-one to make sure that you have the mind-muscle connection necessary in order to actually make meaningful progress. And again, I'm not an advocate for taking away things that you love, because who am I to tell you to stop doing exercise that you enjoy? That's not my goal here. My goal is to guide you in how you spend your energy, because we all have limited amounts of energy and time, and I want you to use it in the most practical, advantageous way possible. And strength training, where you just focus on progressive increases in your strength and in progressive increases in intensity in your training over time, will amount to the best, most quality, and the most efficient progress you can make with your body from a visual standpoint. Now, a lot of people will argue and say, but I've seen visual results from Pilates. I've seen visual results. Great. Think of it like this. There's multiple ways to get to the top of a skyscraper, right? Doing Pilates as a means of cultivating muscle tissue and like meaningfully impacting your visual naked body is kind of like using the stairs. It's going to take you longer to manifest that result, but you will still get there. And then also I would add in the extra layer of the stairs stop at the 40th floor when there's 80 stories to this skyscraper. And the reason I say that is because there is a ceiling on the amount of progress you can see visually with a modality like Pilates. And that's because you can only scale it so far before you have to add in something that gives you heavier weight. Now, here's where I can reassure you. If your destination is the 60th floor, then fuck yeah, you made it. Like, you did it, and you did it with Pilates, and I applaud you. My pursuit to encourage women to implement strength training is for the people that want to progress beyond the 60th floor, who don't want a ceiling on their progress, who do want to see more intermediate results, who do want to see the fastest results from where they're at. That is why I encourage weight training. And if you want to go beyond that 60th floor or 40th floor, whatever it is, then add in strength training. And here's the cool thing. You can keep doing Pilates. You don't have to, like, one is not at the expense of the other. You can keep doing Pilates and you can throw in some heavy barbell squats as a supplement to what you're doing. That's the fact. You can do both. And people tend to want to be a part of a tribe. Well, you can't do that and actually see the most progress you want to make when it comes to anything. You have to be open to all things. And it's not either this or that. It's and. You can do Pilates and you can do barbell squats heavy, because it's not just about doing the movement. It's about doing the movement in a way that is actually progressively scalable and challenging, right? Because a lot of you will say, well, we do those movements. We do those movements. I know you do those movements. I know you do squats in those classes. I know you do rows in those classes. Great. Just because you are holding dumbbells and doing those movements doesn't mean you're actually going to see the progress you want to make with that particular modality. And so in the pursuit of not confusing you and overcomplicating things, at some point, if you want to see intermediate results, you got to do intermediate shit. And that intermediate shit is you getting under a heavy barbell. As much as you want to avoid it, that is the way, that's the fastest way to see progress. It's not the only way, but it's the fastest way and the most scalable way, meaning you can go past that ceiling that Pilates has, or bar, or Orange Theory, or Les Mills body pump. They all have ceilings on them, but you can see a lot of progress with those things. So I hope that makes sense to you all. And then in regards to combining movements, gosh, the amount of people who are just like, but you can scale a renegade row. No, you can't. So if Pilates has the 60th floor as its ceiling, a renegade row has the 2nd floor as its ceiling. And I say that because go try to do a renegade row with an 80-pound dumbbell. Good fucking luck. You can't, but you can eventually row an 80-pound dumbbell by itself. You can do a row individually and scale that way beyond the weight that you can do a renegade row with, where someone has just bastardized 2 different movements, planks and rows, combined them, and now made them unscalable in the pursuit of overcomplicating and combining things to seem cool on social media. A renegade row is a very ineffective way to progress with your body. I'm not saying you won't see any progress doing it. I'm not calling you dumb for doing them. I'm not assaulting your character for criticizing this movement. You can tell me to go fuck myself. It's a voluntary platform. I will tell you that the data and evidence shows that if you want to actually see meaningful progress via muscle tissue stimulation, that you have to do individual movements that allow you to put all your effort and energy into that one movement, instead of splitting your effort and energy between 2 movements while doing them simultaneously to try and make twice the progress. You're actually cutting it in half. Another example would be the lunges with the bicep curls. You can't scale that movement. Again, that the ceiling is going to be at a much lower floor level than other things, because there's no, even with Pilates, you're still, for the most part, paying attention to individual movements one at a time. If you try to combine a curl and a lunge, you're now getting less from the curl and less out of the lunge, because you're concentrating on one while you're doing the other. This probably sounds really commonsensical when I break it down like that, but for some reason, people who are very earlier in their education just, you're confused and you think that combining movements means double the progress. Well, let's just common sense example. Let's take Arnold Schwarzenegger and the people of that time who had arguably the most developed physiques ever. Because we're talking tissue development, and I'm not saying these movements will make you look like Arnold. He's a man, he was on steroids, not gonna happen, right? But the example holds because you have the most developed example of what you are trying to do. You're trying to develop your muscle tissue. Arnold Schwarzenegger was trying to develop his muscle tissue. Or even the women of the time, Rachel McLish, Courtney Everson, look them up. They did not do those types of movements. They did simple compound movements because they were scalable, and that scalability allowed them to progress with that one movement to the highest degree possible. Again, If you think that lunges combined with curls are scalable, go pick up an 80-pound dumbbell and try to do it. You will never be able to do that because you can't have the stability and the tension and the leverage needed to actually perform a quality repetition with that amount of weight when you combine the movements. But when you separate the movements, you can scale to that point. I'm just throwing out numbers there. You could probably try it with a 50-pound dumbbell and get the same result, falling on your ass if you try to do a curl and a lunge combined. You can't put tension on the bicep enough while doing a lunge in order to scale a bicep curl. By the same token, you can't focus on your stability and your balance enough during a lunge, during a weighted lunge, if you're doing a bicep curl simultaneously. But if you separate those two movements, you can do both. You can scale the bicep curl, you can scale the lunge, and now develop your bicep to the utmost potential that it has, in your feminine example, not Arnold Schwarzenegger, and the lunge, respectively. I think that's the best I've ever explained that. So I hope that makes sense. I do fundamentally disagree with people who say that you can scale those movements. Doesn't mean that I'm telling you to stop doing them. If you enjoy them, do them. It's just not something we integrate in our approach. Bulky, I want to hit on real quick. There was another argument that was like, but I don't want to do compound movements because I'll get bulky. The best way I can explain this is there are not certain things that make you bulky when it comes to resistance training. For example, you're either developing your muscle tissue or you're not. You're either getting stronger or you're not. To dumb it down as much as I possibly can, comparing, let's just use Pilates as an example. Comparing Pilates or yoga or anything body weight based or even with light weights to traditional strength training, one just makes you progress slower than the other. So come back to the skyscraper example. If your goal is to develop your body on a visual level to where it's more toned, since that's the word everyone wants to use, lean, sculpted, doing barbell squats, dumbbells, rows, shoulder press, bench press in a controlled, progressive manner is the fastest way to the top of that skyscraper. Doing Pilates is like taking the stairs. And again, you're capped at the 40th floor. That's the comparison. And so when it comes to looking bulky, I think people's perceptions play a part in this because a lot of people misinterpret body fat for bulky. Listen, if you eat in a caloric surplus constantly and you're lifting, the lifting is going to keep you from gaining body fat. Like if it's a big caloric surplus in proportion to where your maintenance level of calories is. So for example, if you neither gain nor lose weight at 2,000 calories and in the pursuit of putting on muscle tissue, you eat at 3,000, you're in a 1,000 caloric surplus. Yes, you're going to get stronger and yes, you're going to gain excess body fat. And that excess body fat may be interpreted as the bulk that you refer to. But that is not because of the weight training. That's because you ate too many calories in proportion to your energy expenditure chronically over time. And yes, you need a caloric surplus to develop your muscle tissue, but it doesn't have to be in a 1,000 caloric surplus, just like it doesn't have to be a 1,000 caloric deficit, right? If you're in a 1,000 calorie deficit to lose weight, you risk losing muscle tissue. If you're in a 1,000 calorie surplus to develop your muscle tissue, you risk gaining excess body fat because both of those examples are too far away from your maintenance, right? It's very general, but this is what holds true, and this is why we do things in a very methodical way. And so coming back to like, will I get bulky or not? Listen, the masculine traits that, you know, the traps and the delts and the, you know, deepened voice perhaps, or like body hair or masculinization come from hormones of which you don't have enough as a woman. Think of it like this too. I used to coach men. I know a lot of people that coach men. You know how hard it is for men to gain muscle? It's fucking hard. And we have advantageous levels of testosterone and lean body mass to begin with. Our propensity to put on muscle is much higher than a woman's. And you think you're going to get bulky overnight? It takes men years. And that's with advantageous hormone profiles. You think you're going to get bulky from looking at a pair of dumbbells? I wish it were that easy. gosh, I hate that time I walked by Harvard and I just had a doctorate all of a sudden. You know, it just doesn't work that way. You have to train hard as balls for years and eat in a caloric surplus for years to even get remotely, quote unquote, bulky. And so people's perception of what bulky is usually erroneous. Just like the other perception of, well, I gained muscle in a caloric deficit. What likely happened is that you lost body fat from a caloric deficit, assuming you were in a caloric deficit, and it made the muscle tissue underneath the body fat that you reduced more visible. And so your perception is that you gained muscle. But what actually happened is the muscle you already had became more visible. Thus, your perception of I gained muscle. Because it is extremely difficult to gain muscle in a caloric deficit, and you can only do it with optimal conditions. And I'm here to tell you, you don't have optimal conditions. Hardly anyone does unless you are some fitness influencer who lives with their parents and that's their entire life, fitness. And they can control every variable. So if you have kids and you have a job and you have responsibilities, your likelihood of having optimal sleep, optimal protein intake, optimal step count, and optimal training 24/7 is so low. And so the notion that you gained muscle in a caloric deficit is absurd based on those realities alone. Not saying it's not possible. That would be wrong. It would be wrong of me to say that it's not possible. It is correct of me to assert that it's very difficult for 99% of people. And for the 1% that can do it, it's hard for them too. Without anabolic steroids or a perfect lifestyle, damn near impossible. And to try and do so is counterproductive long term because one requires a caloric surplus, one requires a caloric deficit. Why would you put your foot on the gas and the brake at the same time? Why not floor it? No, you don't want to floor it either, right? Now we can draw another analogy. If you floor it, you're going to gain too much body fat. If you slam on the brakes, your metabolism, you're going to have metabolic adaptation, you're going to lose muscle. So we want to stay in the speed limit. I hope that was helpful. If it was, by the way, before I get into this last thing, if this episode has been helpful and insightful, message me. Mav is the GOAT, G-O-A-T, greatest of all time. Mav is the GOAT. Let's talk about my number one trait in a woman. And dude, I don't want to be cringe about this. Like, this is something that I just, I get asked a lot. I don't know why. If it's someone's like, oh, well, if I learn his number one trait, I can be that because he's the, I don't know what you all think I am. I'm a very normal human. I'm unremarkable. I'm a single dad. I've been doing what I do for a long time. So I have conviction in what I say and what I do in regards to the content that I put out, but I am not the exemplar of anything. So with that being said, I think and all this is also from my lens, my worldview, right? Everyone has a different worldview. So you just take what lands and discard what doesn't. But I think if I had to put number one trait I would look for is accountability. I think at this point, a genuine apology from someone, like from a prospective partner or from someone in a relationship with me, a genuine apology where someone actually owns what they did and how it might have impacted me, I think would be enough to just put me over the edge. Genuine accountability is really hard to come by. And I'm not saying that only women deal with accountability issues. I think everyone, both it's not gender respective. I think it's universal for sure. There are plenty of men who dodge responsibility for years. I did. But I think that accountability is a great trait to look for someone who owns the role they play in their circumstances, I think is huge. And not thinking that owning the role that you played somehow puts you down a pedestal, puts you down a few notches if you admit mistakes. If anything, it empowers you. It puts you in a position to be in control of your outcome, take responsibility for things that may or may not be working in your best favor, and change them. It's empowering to unvictimize yourself. So many people want to remain a victim. And that's honestly, if I'm being completely transparent with you all, it's the biggest reason why I'm getting away from the whole revenge body thing. I'm changing the name of this podcast. I'm not doing the revenge body thing on the website anymore. That's being completely redone because we were just dealing with a lot of inflamed people who were in that victimhood mentality, who were just like, my circumstances are his fault or her fault, whatever. It's everyone's fault but mine, you know? What a way to stay stuck. And it's really hard to get someone out of that mindset because it extended into their nutrition and their behaviors with food. It's like, oh, I'm like this because of genetics, or oh, I'm like this because... Great, all those things play a role. What are you going to do about it? You know, this is the hand you're dealt. It's not about having a perfect hand. It's about playing the hand you're dealt the best you can. And if you stay blaming things, and I'm learning more about this now, learning about Alder and Jung and Freud all studied at the same time, but Alder kind of went in opposition of them insofar as we're talking about philosophers at this point in the psychotherapy realm, but it's like Freudian, in Alder's viewpoint, keeps people stuck because it ties you to your past. And it's like, well, you're like this because of this. It's very causation related, whereas Alder's like empowering you from the now, giving you the power of choice, and not blaming or like not inventing dynamics based on the meaning you assign trauma and experiences. Alder goes as far to say trauma doesn't exist. I'm not going to state that. I'm just telling you what his view is. And so, you know, it's something that I'm really interested in because it gives a lot of power back to the person. Because when you're not focused on the cause and you're focused more on the solution and how you want to show up moving forward, it makes change. It makes change. It's focusing on I am like this because of this keeps you stuck. I'm not saying the awareness isn't helpful of, oh, okay, yeah, I experienced this as a child. It gave me an increased proclivity to this behavior, etc. That's helpful knowledge to understand yourself. It doesn't change your behavior. That's done with acceptance of self, from my experience, and also empowering yourself with the choice and not, understanding that emotions are tools we use to fuel different things. It's not saying that we do things because of emotions. Otherwise, we'd say everyone is enslaved to emotions, because the immediate counterpoint to that is you can have two different people who feel an emotion but react in totally different ways. Well, then obviously emotions aren't the culprit. It's the person having the emotions and their ability to regulate. And so I'm a big fan of that. It's hard. It's harder than Freud, who says you're like this because of this, and we treat you because of that. To me, that's coping. That's not healing. Anyway, there's my opinions. If I trigger you, just know that it's my opinions. You don't have to listen to me. What do I know? But that's just the school of thought that I resonate with. I think that that's great. So, accountability. That's my number one, I think, for anybody. I think a great question to ask someone on a first date is like, or not maybe on a first date, just at some point, whenever you feel necessary, ask them at some point early on, how'd your last relationship end? What role did you play? What about the one before that? What role did you play? What did you learn from it? Because I'll say this as well, and you'll find this a lot with people in the help space. And I have been guilty of this at certain points in my career. Are you actually learning from your mistakes, or are you leveraging your mistakes to look like you've got it figured out? Because I look at somebody like Tony Robbins, right? That motherfucker's probably been through a lot of pain, because that is what's required to show up at that level with such a level of integrity. Really impactful people who have done the work will admit they don't have it all figured out, and they won't speak. I had to learn this the hard way because I've actually done this before. Unintentionally, but this was a really good rip shot for me. To make it seem like you've got it figured out, you don't still have struggles, is a big error. We all have struggles. Everybody has struggles. It's just whatever your flavor is. And I think that being able to say, not only did I make mistakes, but here's what I learned. I think that's big time. I think it's a great character trait, for someone to have, and it's something I'm working more and more to embody, And I've learned so much through what I do. I can go back and look at old content and say, oh, damn, I don't like how I showed up there. in an effort to get views and clicks, I was a little too aggressive or critical of the very people that I'm trying to help. So it's a really cool thing to not want to delete that. Or maybe I want to delete it sometimes, but being able to sit with it and say, actually, I'm a different person than I was then because I've done the work, and I can show up differently than that. And that's cool. Some people stay stuck in that, you know. I'm so grateful for the awareness to look at old stuff that I put out content wise and say, I've grown and I show up differently now because that wasn't totally in line with who I am and what I'm trying to do. I want to empower the people that I serve, and I don't want to argue with people who aren't willing to have their minds changed. That brings peace to me. So for what it's worth, hope you guys enjoyed this. Message me anytime for questions. Message me your takeaways. Message me your suggestions for podcast episodes. I'm open to all of it. I appreciate you listening. Hope everyone has an amazing week. ESV out. Is being within the normal ranges on lab work doesn't mean anything if you're still symptomatic. What's a free T3 level of 2.5 matter if you still struggle with your energy, if you still struggle with your ability to lose visceral fat, if you have brain fog, sleep issues, if your overall well-being is suffering? What's it matter if your free T3 is within the normal range? Who cares what the reference range says if you don't feel how it says that you should? So instead of looking at a set of numbers and saying, since you fall within this very broad range, you should feel normal, here's an antidepressant. At SLAY, we found the best approach is to get a baseline of lab work, so we know the levels where you are symptomatic, and then optimize over time based on how you feel. Imagine that.